Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Good. Just want to take a moment right now to kind of thank everybody behind the scenes, everybody here involved with TEDx. You guys are doing a great job. Because of you, we're all here. So thank you for that. I'm here to talk about vulnerability. And I'm here to talk about vulnerability as a way to change and as a way of finding transformation. People ask me what I do, and I have the hardest time answering that question. And ultimately, I think I'm a student of the human condition. I'm really curious to know more about people and the reasons as to why they do the things that they do. And everything that you see, everything that we do, I believe, is involved in story. And so as it pertains to vulnerability, I think when we hear vulnerability, we think of vulnerability as a negative thing. We see it as a sign of weakness. And we see it being exposed and being wounded as something that is not desirable. But with the short time that I've been on this planet, I realize that's not necessarily the case. I'm going to share 3 stories that kind of demonstrate how vulnerability can lead to the opposite. It can lead to something more desirable. So I have these note cards because, I'm Afghan. If you let me up here on stage, I can talk for hours, so this is going to keep me on track. And so first and foremost, I'd like to talk about my parents. My parents are from Afghanistan. I was born in Afghanistan. My father was taught by a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1960s in Kandahar, when Peace Corps was first starting out. And he learned English and eventually got to work with USAID in Kabul. And then, as everybody knows, in 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. And so at that time, my father was working for the Soviet-backed Afghan government. And one day, he was given an ultimatum. Either you're going to essentially adopt our ideology or else. So that night, he comes home, tells Mom, pack up the bags, we're leaving. And up until this point, my mother had never left her neighborhood in Kabul. And so, as my parents had to do, they got on horseback, took me and my brother, and went 7 days and 6 nights from Kabul to Peshawar, Pakistan. And over the course of 7 days and 6 nights, my parents, we, hid under the cover of night and slept during the day in caves and villages along the way. And we had to avoid gunships and, death along the way. But through the grace of God, we eventually got to the refugee camp in Peshawar, where millions of other Afghans were. Spent 2 years in Pakistan. And through the English that my father learned, and the names that the people that he became friends with, he went to the consular office in Islamabad, and the consular officer essentially checked his story out. And we were granted political asylum to come to the United States. And we landed in a small little place called Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And Carlisle, Pennsylvania, as you may know, is not New York City. And my parents expected to be landing in New York City. I mean, isn't all of America like New York City? Tall buildings, big screens, money grows on trees, the good life. Lo and behold, did we realize the place that we landed represented Afghanistan more than it represented the United States. People had beards. We lived close to the Amish. The world's a funny place. So my parents started from scratch. We had nothing. We had a group of people that supported us and taught my parents and taught us how to live again, how to shop, what taxes meant, how to live. And, as a kid, you don't know any better. You don't know what's good, what's wrong. You essentially just are exposed to these different things. And as a kid, I didn't know, we were starting from scratch. Until one day, later on, I realized I was 11 years old, and realized my parents at this point, we were doing okay. And I was sitting in the living room with my dad, and there was a photo of his mom, my grandmother, on the table. And as Afghan men do, we don't really talk when we're with each other about our feelings. And so we're just kind of enjoying the silence. And I remember looking over at my dad, And he's staring at this photo of his mother, and he starts to cry. And it was the first time I've ever seen my father cry. And what's really interesting about it is that simple moments can unravel people. And in that moment, I realized that vulnerability means strength. So what's interesting about our story is that it's not unique. Refugees at that time and refugees to this day have similar stories. And they flee and they fight and they survive. But what is unique about our story is that after I graduated college, we're Afghan, we're from Asia, pretty much had two options, in terms of a profession. I was going to be a doctor or engineer. And I wasn't that, right? I wasn't that at all. I studied social sciences. My parents to this day are like, what did you study in college? What is that? How can you use that? Can that get you a job? And so what did I decide to do? I decided to join the Peace Corps. And I decided to do something different. And I decided to give back. And I joined the Peace Corps in 2005, but I didn't know what to expect. This was before Google and Facebook took over our lives and before smartphones were everywhere. And so what's beautiful about the Peace Corps is they essentially drop you off in your village and they say, good luck, have fun. And I'm in the middle of Mozambique, and Mozambique's a beautiful place. And at the time, I'd learned some Portuguese. I could say, hello, how are you, where's the bathroom? But not enough to really, make an impact. And that was my idealistic perspective. I wanted to make an impact. And, as a young person, I thought to myself, I'm going to go to this community, and I am going to change these people. I am going to enlighten these people on how to live a better life, how to live a Western life, how to live an American life. And all that changed when I got malaria. The first time. And so I get malaria and I'm not feeling well, my body aches and things aren't good. I just know something's up. Man, what's going on? And so I end up going to the clinic and they do a malaria test and it comes out positive. So I start taking medication to cleanse this thing out of my body. And at the clinic, there were many, many, many people there in line waiting to get treated. Up until that point, people in my village saw me as a giver, saw me as something or somebody that could give them something. And I didn't really have much to give. I had a bag of clothes, English that I could speak, and then ideals that I believed in. I didn't have, money, And so they would always come up to me being like, Teacher Bach, can I have this? Can I have that? And I couldn't give them what they wanted. Everything from candy to pencils to, a BMW. And one day, like I said, when I got malaria, all that changed. And slowly but surely, it spread throughout the village that I gotten sick. And people started coming to me and giving me food that they had. And giving me coal that they essentially bought that I could use to make food, start my meals. And they gave me things that I never really, really expected them to give me. And it was amazing. And slowly but surely, that happened through the course of my experience. And I realized in that light that vulnerability meant acceptance. And it was a beautiful thing. And now with Facebook, they still ping me over, the Atlantic Ocean. They still ask me for pencils and candy and things of that nature. Facebook. So, moreover, in 2010, the surge was announced to go to Afghanistan and clear out Islamic radicalism and insurgents to that country so it wouldn't become a safe haven for Al-Qaeda or another Islamic terrorist group. And so at that time, I was late in my 20s, and I thought to myself, this is a perfect time to go back and serve again. Instead of serving in terms of instilling a sense of skill. For example, in the Peace Corps, I was an English teacher. In Afghanistan, I essentially was an interpreter. And it was the best experience of my life in many ways. And the reason why is because I got to take two worlds that were so different from one another, ideologically, emotionally, culturally, geographically, and bring them together. And I think about that experience to this day, and I think to myself, I've never been so valued in a role than I was then. And I flourished, and I loved it, and I stayed there for 3 years. I want to tell you about one individual. His name was Qazi, and he was a quintessential soldier. He was an Afghan commando, and everywhere he went, he had this air of just confidence, and people just followed him. He had 5 sons. He was the kind of guy, he taught me a lesson. He was the kind of guy that did one thing at a time, because he said if you do too many things at a time, nothing will ever get done. And to demonstrate that point, while we were eating, he wouldn't speak, he would simply eat. I thought that took amazing control. One day we were on a mission in a village in Badghis, which is in northwestern Afghanistan. And he was leading a platoon. We're all there. We're clearing this village. And we find some Taliban insurgents, and we're cornering them. And we're going after them, and he's leading the charge. And I remember standing on a little hill looking down at Qazi's in front, leading this charge. And he's standing behind a wall. And he stands up and puts his head right above the wall, and a bullet hits him in the head. Interpreter, interpreter, I go running down. And by the time I get there, the medic's trying to work on him, essentially revive him. And I'm standing there in the blood and the horror. And the bullet went right through his eye, and it killed him. And in that moment, I realized the vulnerability means to be alive. Right? And so that experience, being in Afghanistan, changed my life. And I came back and I decided to get into documentary filmmaking and documenting people's stories. And I think it's really important to do that because that's all we have. Everybody here in this room has a story. Everybody here has been vulnerable. In these small moments, people are being vulnerable to you. And I think that's the first place in which we can essentially take a step closer to the other. So the idea that I essentially want to get across here today is that seek vulnerability. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a place where we can learn. It's a place where we can feel connected, and ultimately that's what we all want to do. We all want to feel connected with one another. We're designed to be that way. And if we're connected with one another, we'll become more present. And I believe if we're more present, we'll be more happy. We don't have that much time on this planet. Enjoy it while you can. Life is a fragile thing. It really is. Some people say that peace starts with suffering. I've heard others say that freedom starts with confinement. Or that strength starts with surrender. Or even that courage starts with fear. But I say that change starts with vulnerability. Thank you.